David Steelman has worn quite a few hats over the past few decades. He was a state lawmaker, a statewide candidate, and now he's the head of the University of Missouri System Board of Curators. Steelman joins us on the latest edition of Politically Speaking to talk about the future of higher education in Missouri and the demise of former Governor Eric Greitens. Let's hit the music.
This is the Politically Speaking podcast, a candid conversation with the Show Me State's biggest political newsmakers.
I'm Jason Rosenbaum.
And I'm Joe Mannies.
Elections should be about your accomplishments. What have you done to qualify you for the position, and why are you qualified to run?
I'm going to push back on these regulators.
I'm doing this for the people.
I was encouraged along the way, not just by my family, but by a lot of teachers and professors, and knew when I was in college that I would run for office someday.
We're very excited about the prospect of having some more free market solutions.
Even though after the conversation, I still might not agree.
We want our listeners to get a real sense of what drives these people.
They're actually people with a story to tell. And welcome to Politically Speaking. I'm your host, Jason Rosenbaum, a reporter with St. Louis Public Radio. Joining me in St. Louis today is
Colleague Joe Mannies.
And Missouri's second most prominent politician from Dent County in the history of the world. We have in studio today.
I have David Steelman. I heard, though, the intro said today's biggest political newsmakers, and I hate to disappoint you and your listeners.
Is it disappointing that Jason Smith is now the most prominent Dent County in Missouri politics?
Not at all. There comes a phase in everybody's life when being less prominent is a good thing. Plus, Jason has been a friend of mine and our families for a long time. He was actually a pallbearer at my father's funeral.
Yeah, I know that actually your wife, Sarah Steelman, was thinking about running for that seat, but I think she actually dropped out and endorsed Jason Smith or led the way.
No, that's right. Jason is a longtime family friend. I think I just think the world of him. I mean, he's a great guy.
And doing very well in Congress. But we're not here to talk about him. You are the president of the University of Missouri System Board of Curators.
And the chairman.
Yes, and you also have a long political history of your own.
Which we want you to sum up in like 5 minutes if you can.
Well, but
I lost my only statewide race. How's that?
There you go.
But go ahead and tell a little bit about your family, why your dad's important. I mean, just kind of the whole thing, because this is something our listeners should know.
Well, I believe in public service, and it was instilled into me by my family. My father was a state legislator in the 50s and 60s, served with Wayne Good, by the way. And state chairman. The lodge down at Montauk is named after him. I was in the legislature. I ran for office. My wife was in the state senate and state treasurer and ran for governor, of course. And it is just we in the Steelman family believe that public service matters, and trying to do the right thing for the public matters.
Well, one of the things I remember, because I covered your race for Missouri Attorney General in 1992, which remains one of the nastiest contests I ever covered. It was one of my first ones, and I didn't realize till later how notable that one was. I mean, you and Jay Nixon, who was the Democratic nominee, it got really, really personal. And what's interesting is you guys now are friends. That was my point.
It's funny. I don't view it that way. I think that we thought at that time it was a nasty race. I don't think it holds a candle to how nasty races are today. And the governor, Jay Nixon, and I did become friends over the years. He, of course, is who appointed me to the Board of Curators. I remember saying to him when things were going badly, I said, Jay, I thought we'd made up and become friends, but now I know you appointed me because you're still mad.
Yeah.
But it's all worked out good.
It obviously has worked out good. And interestingly, the podcast that's going to air after this is of Jay Nixon. So how about that for symmetry? But I do want to talk a lot about the University of Missouri system and the state of the UM system. It's not really a secret, but I don't really talk about it that much on the show, that I am a third-generation Mizzou graduate. My dad, mom, and grandpa went there. So even though I am a journalist and supposed to be objective, I do have a soft spot for that particular university, and obviously care about the four-campus system because both Joe and I are actually employees of the of UMSL in particular. So just generally, what are kind of your thoughts about the state of the four-campus system now? And we'll use that as a starting off point for discussion.
This is going to sound like salesmanship. It's really not. I've been following the university for 40 years. When I was in the legislature, what was then UMR at Rolla actually was an area that I had a lot of people that I represented. Sarah, my wife, when she was in the state senate, she had that area. I have been involved in it. I've been on the Law School Foundation. So I have followed it for 40 years, top to bottom. This is the best leadership we have ever had, and leadership matters. I think that the University of Missouri 30 years ago was great. I think that we're good, but we have a ways to go to be great again. I think we owe it to the state of Missouri to be great, but I think we're making tremendous progress. We're undergoing some transformations that other universities talk about and can't pull off.
Yeah, now just so people know, my son also is a graduate of Mizzou. He loved it. It was not his first choice, wasn't his second choice, but when he ended up there, because he didn't like where he was, he loved it. He ended up going to law school there, and he graduated Phi Beta Kappa, so he has a real soft spot for Mizzou, too.
Not to pump up your ego anymore, but didn't you graduate first in your class from Mizzou Law School?
That's something I try to keep secret.
It's a secret.
As much as possible. But I want to say, Joe, you just brought up really a great point. I went to Mizzou because that's where I wanted to go. I had other options. I went to Mizzou because that's where I wanted to go. I don't want students going there because it's a second or third choice. I want to get to the point again that they want Mizzou to be their first choice, and they go to Mizzou because it can deliver on its promises.
But that's one of the reasons he went to law school there, is because he enjoyed, and I don't mean from a party standpoint, but the study standpoint, the quality of his professors and the quality of the program that he was in, that he decided to stay there for law school. And it didn't help that he got some aid because he was Phi Beta Kappa, but I'm bagging about my son here.
As you should. well, can I bring this up, though? This is what is so interesting about where we're going. There are really some remarkable things happening. The Kinder Institute, I don't know how much you follow the Kinder Institute. The Kinder Institute is doing groundbreaking issues on constitutional democracy and our problems, race in America, things like that. That are really cutting edge and as good. We've got kids going to Oxford. We have great students. There are some tremendous things happening. What we have to do is be excellent across the board. We need to make some tough decisions, and I'll tell you, it's interesting because we're on a radio station that was one of our better decisions. We had a public station going on in Rolla, and we had this public station. This public station, not to brag on you guys, is one of the great public stations in the nation.
Yes, it is.
Right now. And so it wasn't easy, particularly I'm the curator from Rolla, and I had friends at that radio station, but it was ridiculous to try to operate two public radio stations by the university, particularly when we have such a great one here. And it's a hard decision, and we folded that one into this institution or this station, and it's tremendous. Those are decisions that have been put off, should have been made years ago, but we're making them now.
And we're in the process of hiring actually a reporter in Rolla, so that people that live there won't just hear about like the first and second congressional district races anymore. I do want to talk about President Choi because he recently received a 2-year extension on his contract.
By unanimous vote of the Board of Curators.
Yeah, and I wanted you to kind of talk about that because I was talking to you before we pressed record. I've gone through a lot of UM system presidents since I was a student and as a reporter. People like Elson Floyd are people I hold in deep regard because not only do I think that he was a dynamic leader, but he actually made an effort to interact with students, which was kind of unusual from the UM system perspective. And then there were people like Tim Wolf, who I feel personally, as a Mizzou alumni, did not provide the leadership that was needed during the 2015 protests. It seems like President Choi is more of the Elson Floyd mold than the Tim Wolf mold. That's my observation. I wanted you to.
I don't think there's any comparison. What I have to say about Moon Choi, I can't. It'll sound over the top, but in 18 months, the transformation that he has made, particularly in our relationship with legislators, but also I get it from faculty and administration on all 4 university campuses, UMSL, UMKC, Missouri Science and Technology, and Mizzou, is nothing short of remarkable. And I not only think that when we're done, he'll be the best president the University of Missouri has ever had. I think that he will be known as one of the true visionary leaders in American higher ed, like a Michael Crow at Arizona State or like Mitch Daniels is doing at Purdue.
I want to talk about kind of one of the things he's dealing with the legislature the past 2 years, and that's the funding situation. When he was on Politically Speaking a couple months ago, I asked him about the challenges that the UM system faces when it comes to funding higher education, because higher education is primarily funded when you're talking just about the state resources through general revenue. When there's an economic downturn or when the budget situation isn't very good, things that are funded with general revenue typically get hit. This is kind of his observations about that particular situation.
They also recognize that the pot of resources that is available to support the various programs, including K through 12, to infrastructure, to serving Medicaid, really does leave very little for new initiatives or new investments. And in economic periods of economic distress, higher education in many states throughout the United States has been looked upon as a source that can absorb the cuts, partly because universities have the ability to grow their own revenue through increasing enrollment and increasing tuition. But the difficult position that University of Missouri system has faced is the restrictions that were placed on our ability to increase tuition by Senate Bill 389.
By the way, Senate Bill 389, I believe, was the 2007 bill that was mainly about MOHELA and selling out assets. But actually, the thing that stood the test of time is this restriction on tuition. I'm interested as a curator, is that an issue that's coming up when you're dealing with trying to fund the four-campus system adequately, especially when state revenues aren't as high as they used to be?
Well, all the time, but it is not as simple. I remember my friend, I think Mike Gibbons, was the sponsor, and Mike did a lot of things well, but he didn't understand what he didn't understand.
I think Gary Nodler was actually the sponsor of that.
Was Nodler that?
Yeah,
okay,
but I think that obviously Gibbons was the president of the Senate, so I'm sure he played a big role. But
so,
continue.
Anyhow, it is so much. We intend to keep tuition accessible, but one of the things that a lot of institutions are doing is what's called differential tuition, which is that engineering school has an upcharge, the business school has an upcharge, and you can use that then to make some of the other studies lower cost. And by tying our hands on that, we haven't had a tool that has really done a lot of good things, not just for universities, but for the students. It also keeps us from putting as much money as we want back into scholarships for the underserved communities and for people who are high achievers but don't have financial resources. So its real problem is I'm for keeping tuition low, but it has tied our hands on doing some things that would really be good, such as differential tuition. An engineering professor costs us $200,000 a year. An English professor might cost us $60,000, $70,000 a year, and yet they're paying the same tuition. It makes no sense.
I would sense that there's not really a lot of legislative appetite to have a direct funding source to fund higher education. Let's say raise the cigarette tax and then it only goes to higher education. That's probably not going to happen anytime soon.
I'm not convinced of that. They tried to get it off the ground on the cigarette tax just a few years ago. But we're in competition with other states, and I think more and more legislators, and I know there's been some field trips down to the state of Georgia, which is the New South, and it really every conservative indicia magazine says it's the number one place to do business. They have made tremendous use of, like, film credits. Half all the Missouri movies are filmed in.
I know,
including
one
in
that
Georgia.
I've been watching now.
And I had lunch about 2 years ago with one of the prominent citizens, and I said, "How did you do it? What made this change to you in the state of Georgia?" And he said, "Well, we've had a lot of good things, a lot of great leadership, but he thought the number one thing was the Georgia Hope Scholarship, which is their lottery proceeds have been earmarked to scholarships for students, and particularly high-achieving students, called the Zell Miller Scholarship because he was governor, can go to any public school, Georgia school, that they can get accepted into. So now Georgia has Georgia Tech and University of Georgia, two of the preeminent public institutions in the world, driving their economy. And I think we've got people who may look at that and think maybe that's not such a bad idea.
Now, has legislative term limits perhaps contributed to some of this? Because whoever's doing the field trips or going down to Georgia or doing whatever, in a few years they're not going to be in the General Assembly, and so you're going to have somebody else who hasn't done the field trip. I'm just wondering if that makes it more difficult because there's not that much institutional knowledge of these things.
I don't know. We could do hours on term limits. And what has happened. I would note that Georgia, which has been very successful, does not have term limits. But I'm not sure that's really what it is. I believe that higher ed has not done its job as a salesman. I think from that clip you played of Moon Choi, he recognizes the budget issues. I want to compare that to so many higher ed leaders who say, oh, Republicans don't like higher education. Well, that's baloney. You've only got so much room in the budget.
Yeah,
and Medicaid has been absolutely a ravenous beast on the budget. And I think the Missouri legislature was very committed to higher ed in this last session.
And that's why whenever we talk about higher education funding, I always bring up the issue of direct funding sources. Like, I take a little bit more dispassionate view of what happened in like 2017, to some extent 2018, because when the budget numbers aren't that good, you have very few good choices. Are you going to cut general revenue items like corrections or K through 12
Jason,
or
let's
anything
face it,
else?
you don't have any other choices.
You don't really have
higher
any choices.
education is where the money is. It's like, why did you climb Mount Everest? Because it was there. Well, why do you cut from higher ed? Because that's where the discretionary funds are.
Now the protests of a few years ago, which some believe not only hurt enrollment but also hurt relations between the Mizzou system and legislators, although some of those legislators are now gone because of term limits. I'm just wondering, what's been the fallout of that? Is that kind of ease now, or just kind of what's your assessment? Because you were there then, so you know.
I think it is totally eased in my conversations with legislators and the way they receive Moon Choi. But let's make it clear. What hurt Missouri was not the protests. It always surprises people, but frankly, a university that doesn't have a little protesting going on is a pretty dull place to be.
No kidding.
What hurt Missouri was the ridiculous mishandling of it by some of our leaders. Leadership matters. Leadership matters at the state level. Leadership matters at the university level. We've got some great leaders at the university level now.
In fact, that is pretty much the point Moon Choi made in my interview with him a couple months ago.
And let's all think back to that period and reflect on what really happened. These were protests that were nonviolent. There was no property damage. No one was injured. And at a university that really embraces freedom of expression, we need to be able to discuss difficult concepts, difficult ideas, and address difficult situations. The concern that I heard from many of the legislators and the citizens really revolved around how the university addressed the protest and the lack of leadership that they believed existed at the university in the aftermath of the protest. And so that is where the accountability and leadership was really emphasized for all of us. And I brought that message back to our senior team and I continue today to talk about accountability and leadership.
I think that the difficult way of handling race relations on a college campus is kind of as follows. You can certainly have programs in place to give to students and faculty, and you can certainly expel students that do something overtly racist, like the things that happened in 2015. I think that the challenge that administrators have is it's almost impossible to make people like each other in colleges and change people's inward beliefs about each other.
Well, I don't know if you've noticed this, Jason, but it's not just colleges. There are people everywhere who people don't like each other, but you do learn to get along and you learn to work together, and that's what universities are about.
Well, I mean, when I went to college in the early 70s, I mean, the university that I went to, the students burned the administration building my senior year in high school, which made me interested, made my dad say, you're not going there, but I went. Yeah. But my point being, because there was the fight over the Vietnam War and the unrest at universities over that, which was several years, there was, Kent State where some students were killed. My point being is that some of this unrest or concern about the unrest now, I think in some ways, if it's peaceful, let people express themselves. I mean, as I said, 40 years ago, I saw a lot worse.
Absolutely. This was totally peaceful. Part of it, I hate to pick on your folks' profession, but the media really mishandled this and misplayed it. They were looking for a story. The pictures and the TV pictures were taken through the frame where it looked like there were 500 students when there were 15 students. They wanted to act like there was danger. We've now found out that actually Russian hacking drove some of the hysteria, and that has been reported as a fact. This was a completely peaceful protest. Frankly, it could have been handled much differently. Everybody thought that the board told Tim Wolf to resign. I actually thought we needed a new president, but nobody even knew he was going to resign when he did. It was. You also see that Bowen Lofton resigned because of this. The Bowen Lofton resigned because he was in a fight with the deans. It was not reported accurately in my view.
I do want to ask, though, because I do feel from going to the University of Missouri-Columbia in the early to mid-2000s that there were real racial issues on that campus that kind of strung along from that point and before that point, clearly, up until 2015. As the head of the University of Missouri System Curators, can you tell prospective African-American students that if they send their kids to Mizzou now, it is going to be a better environment than what was protested about in 2015?
Well, I don't want to necessarily buy the premise of your question. There are issues with race in every institution of higher ed and, frankly, every institution of government that exists today, which we are trying to work through, and frankly, I'd say not very innovatively or imaginatively. There were no, despite the protest, there were no individuals with the university ever identified as racist or a racist issue. So I do want to say the relations are important to me, and working on the issues that are part of society are important. I don't believe that the University of Missouri had any more or different problems than anybody else, but I would rely on some of our great African-American leaders. Darrell Chapman is our vice chairman right now, and Howard Richards, the football player. I would ask them, but it is interesting to me that I hear tremendous support from very prominent African Americans in this state for the University of Missouri.
And so going forward, do you see? Well, I know one of the things you wanted to talk about was some of the innovations or things that are going to be happening going forward, just in general at the university. I mean, is any of that tied into this, or is it more broader in a new direction?
Well, it's broader. All of higher ed is facing problems, both with public funding and, frankly, administrations got bloated. There are the super rich institutions like Harvard with over $20 billion endowment that don't have to operate efficiently. You can't do that as a public institution. Dr. Choi and our other leaders are undertaking tremendous transformation of administration. We're going to do away with the administration bloat. We're going to save 50, 60, maybe $90 million. We're going to put back into the core functions.
A year?
Of core functions of education and research where we haven't been performing or demanding as much as we should. We're going to look at our programs. There are programs on university campuses that, frankly, have outlived their usefulness, and they need to be cut, and that's very problematic on a university campus. We need to differentiate. We don't need every one of our universities. UMSL does not need every program that Mizzou has, and Mizzou doesn't need every program UMSL has. We need to make use of some of the excellence of the different programs. Mizzou in biomedical engineering and plant science, UMSL in criminal justice, and some of the studies we're talking about on race relations, particularly with the criminal justice system. And that sounds easy, but it hasn't been done, and I believe we're going to accomplish it because of Moon Choi.
We spent a lot of time on this show talking about Mizzou, but I do want to give you an opportunity to talk about the other three campuses and what they're doing and any particular things that you see as a curator that is either good, either needs improvement, or spectacularly bad. I know you're going to say lots of bad things about the Rolla campus because you just want to burn all your bridges at home.
Jason's being sarcastic.
I'm being sarcastic.
Well, I will say we need more research out of the Rolla campus. It's pretty easy for us to say what's good and wrong, or good and bad. University of Missouri St. Louis was in a terrible fiscal shape not that many years ago. In fact, it was we had the threat of financial exigency and massive layoffs. And I got to say something for the Chancellor, Tom George, here. You know, it's interesting that you think your long-term chancellors are not going to lead transformation and change, but you've got to give him credit. He's our longest-serving chancellor by far, but the fiscal responsibility that he's put into place on the University of Missouri St. Louis campus, along with Rick Baniak, the fiscal officer, and Kristen, the provost, has really been amazing. University of Missouri St. Louis has gone from a deficit, a serious threat of financial exigency, to really being a very well-run institution right now.
And I think that was, I mean, there's really no question that the Ferguson protests probably did short-term affect enrollment there, since UMSL is so close to Ferguson.
Although, can I interrupt?
Sure.
But the great way that Tom George handled it, and you can go and talk to political figures like Senator Chappelle Nadal or Senator Nasheed, and they will tell you that the way that UMSL and its campus and its faculty reacted to that is really something I think we can all be proud of.
And that's what I was going to say. I mean, I think around that time is when the financial issues were very dire. And then since that time, I don't think that UMSL has had to cut as much compared to some of the other campuses because they made the cuts way early on. Is that your understanding?
Well, and they've not only been making the cuts, but they have put in some very innovative fiscal responsibility measures, and it'll bore you, along with reporting, delegation of authority, because of Rick Banyak's background, frankly, at Boyne, I think, has come to help, that the rest of the campuses are going to need to emulate and copy from. UMSL has really been a tremendous success over the last few years.
Well, and also the whole question of fundraising. I mean, hey, that's how our radio station operates. I mean, we get virtually no state money, so it's not like we're diverting money that can go into a classroom. We get it from donors from all parties.
Listeners like you.
Yes, and it's.
But you know why you get
great.
that philanthropy? Because you all do a good job.
Thank you.
Same thing with universities. You do a good job, you're excellent, and the philanthropy is a lot easier to come by.
Well, that leads us to our next topic, where you may not be thanking us afterwards. So we wanted to spend a few minutes talking about the demise of former Governor Eric Greitens. And the reason we want to talk with you about it is both you and your wife, former treasurer Sarah Steelman, now current Office of Administration Director Sarah Steelman, were probably some of the most prominent supporters of Eric Greitens.
Early supporters.
In 2015, 2016. I mean, I saw you guys at rallies, and I would say both of you took a pretty big risk of backing a candidate with no political experience and no electoral experience. And
didn't work out very well.
It did not work out very well. I want to just ask you flat out, I've heard some reports that there was a falling out between the governor and both you and Sarah Steelman before January 2018. Is that true?
I don't believe that's true of Sarah. I don't call it a falling out. I'll tell you exactly what happened. I thought the governor was making some real mistakes in governing. I thought that he turned out, I thought we were going to elect a great leader. I think he did not understand leadership. He did not understand win-win. I would say the biggest difference between him and Mike Parson is I have no question that Mike Parson loves the state of Missouri and its citizens more than he values his political career, which is rare. There is no question in my mind that Eric Greitens valued his run for presidency more than he did the state of Missouri or its citizens. And I, Joe, you know me.
Yes.
I can't ever sit quietly. I did have a meeting with the governor, which I thought I shared very respectfully, that I thought his bullying, his dark money, some of the way he was handling some of the commissions, you take a education commissioner who he appointed, who took an oath to do her best job, and basically people in his office ordered her not to keep her oath. And I've always when I run into an office that operates to where someone else's oath doesn't matter, it makes me wonder what they value. So
now, when did this meeting take place generally?
Fairly early on.
So you're saying early 2017?
It was about the time of the after the Education Commission.
So that was actually, I think that was fall 2017.
Well, no, I think it was earlier in that.
Yeah, I think it was earlier in that.
Yeah,
it was pretty early on. And anyway, here's the story. The chief of staff and the staff made it very clear that I was persona non grata in the governor's office. Whether the governor felt that way, I'll never know. But I remember wanting to do a favor because I thought they were dropping the ball on the PGA and trying to set up a meeting that I didn't want to go to because I had a trial coming up, and it getting canceled by the chief of staff.
PGA? What do you mean by the PGA?
The one that's going on right now in St. Louis.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. So anyway, that is the absolute story of it. So I don't know if it's a falling out, but
it
but
sure
it was
sounds
clear
like
that it was clear that my advice was not.
It's just very stunning to me because, again, there were no bigger true believers of Greitens. Maybe exaggerating a little bit. Obviously, Greitens was a true believer of himself, but both you, but both you and Sarah were huge true believers of Greitens, and the fact that I don't know about her. I would have to ask her what her experiences was in the final
As Joe
months.
knows, we have a rule in my family.
Yeah.
I never speak for
Exactly.
Sarah.
Yes.
I
Yes.
want to make it clear. I'm not speaking for her. It just seems like if you were persona non grata, then there must have been something going terribly wrong in that administration.
Well, I think it's obvious now in background, and I believe I know what it is. It goes back to politics. I mean, I don't want to wax too philosophical and bore you all to death.
No, but listen, our listeners, they're into this. Go ahead, proceed.
But what has happened in modern politics, back when I used to run, we were trying to reach out to the middle. We were trying to reach out to other people. And now everything is a base election. Everything is a wave election. Eric Greitens became elected governor, frankly, with 29%. We used to say 50% plus one. He was elected governor because of 29% of a small primary vote, because no Democrat was going to win last election while Donald Trump was winning by 19 points. And so he didn't have experience. His consultants, that's how they run it. And there's such a tremendous difference between governing and leading and trying to collaborate with people and figure out what is the best answer, not the easy answer. What actually moves the state forward, not what moves my poll numbers among a base forward. And he surrounded himself with great young people who someday will be very successful, but they all bought into this idea that he not only had to win, but he had to make sure that nobody else got credit for it. I can tell you time after time, his use of dark money against Doug Libla, his use of the meetings with the Senate where he would try to intimidate them. It was never going to work. It's not how a constitutional democracy operates.
Now, I said when he was, and the reason I want to go into this a little bit, frankly, for our listeners, is that I think you can learn things. I mean, without, damaging somebody's reputation more than already is. But still, there are lessons here beyond, whatever happened in his basement. When he was running, I mean, he got national attention. He was on national TV. A lot of people saw many of the good things he'd done as far as the Mission Continues charity for veterans.
Which let me say this. I have to say this. I go back to the mistakes. The Eric Greitens I met before the election was one of the most impressive human beings I've ever met in my life. There are a lot of good qualities to Eric Greitens. The cabinet that serves now under Governor Parson, most of them, is really a great cabinet that was put together by his efforts and him going out and reaching out to people. He simply didn't have anyone around him. His inner circle just did not know what they didn't know.
Well, I mean, was it that he really didn't care about governing? I mean, as opposed to, I mean, there's a difference between being a candidate and being an office holder. And you and I both known over the years, I mean, last 30 or 40 years, I can think of some, and I'm not going to name names, who were either good candidates, lousy office holders, or lousy candidates managed to get in office anyway and actually ended up being pretty good, of both parties.
Totally different skill sets.
Yeah, yes, exactly. So in his case, he, was a strong candidate. I think there's no question. Whether one agrees or disagrees with his methods, he was a strong candidate. And, I mean, he was in here a little over two and a half years ago, promising on the broadcast that he was going to make sure that everybody knew who his donors were. He was blasting dark money. He was, saying that's not I believe in transparency. He brought it up, all this stuff. I mean, 8 months later, it turns out all of his money for the general election in 2016, I mean, I'm talking like 85% of it came from we don't know where. And was funneled through the Republican Governors Association. After that, it even got worse. So my point is, was it advice? Was it that he really didn't care about running the state of Missouri and was looking towards the next thing? I'm just wondering, I mean, from your perspective, and what lessons can people take from this?
None of us will really know. I think the lessons that we can take from it is that experience matters, and no one likes to hear it with the outsider still being the important word. It's interesting. Donald Trump is obviously the outsider, but has a lot of experience. I think that if Eric Greitens had had more experience, he would have recognized how bad some of the advice was he was getting.
I got to ask you, did you have anything to do with the campaign that eventually revealed the affair publicly? Like, did you spread any rumors about it being there? Were you involved in the Watkins money thing at all?
You know, it's funny because I did not realize that the press actually had that story, Joe, until you told me that afterwards.
See, I don't hide things.
I want you to clear your name if you weren't involved.
Well, let me say, I don't know what you mean by clear my name. I think you're really talking about my friend Scott Fahn, and we can get into that.
Yeah, go ahead.
But which I'm happy to get into. But as far as the campaign against Governor Greitens, my wife was in his cabinet. They'd made it very clear they didn't want my advice, and that was okay. I've got a different life.
Yeah. Well, the reason I bring that up is I had really big misgivings about the way this story was exposed. If you listen to the various 1,000-part podcasts we did, I found it distasteful that the ex-husband basically revealed a potential sex crime against his ex-wife without her permission.
Why? Her name wasn't used.
Well, her name wasn't used, but it was very easy to figure out who she was.
Well, how was it easy? It wouldn't have been easy if the campaign for Greitens hadn't have put it out. I mean, you all are saying. Let me say this, and I want to go back to this. It is if and I'm not criticizing you guys per se, but let me criticize the press. If Woodward and Bernstein had shown the same lack of initiative that the media did over Eric Greitens' story, Richard Nixon would have been elected to a third term as president. It is unbelievable to me that now we have all this posturing and this whining about, how did this story come out, simply because Lauren Traeger happened to be the reporter in the state who had the initiative to find what was an important story. And I don't care about the sex, but frankly, if he'd have told me he'd have had an affair, I'm not sure it would have necessarily affected whether I supported him. Had I read that report, you bet it would have affected it. So it is interesting to me that the way that, frankly, one of the things Eric Greitens did wrong was his people never understood crisis management. They thought it was another campaign or a criminal trial. Crisis management is totally different, and lawyers and political consultants who think they understand crisis management always mess it up because the words "I'm sorry" and honesty go a long way in crisis management. But it is interesting to me that I have some great reporters I know who have pushed a narrative that we all know Jason came right out of the Greitens camp, and I'm a believer in the Novak theory of never burn a source. But the idea that there was something wrong with the way the story broke, or there was something wrong with the fact that Scott Fahn is trying to buy information for a book is frankly just laughable to me.
You honestly believe he used that he wasn't a bag man?
Well, I don't know what you mean by a bag man. I
think there are very few people who believe he used his own money to get
What difference does that make? What difference does that make? Now, and what do you mean by his own money? But
I think this is my personal belief. I think somebody gave him the $100,000 and then used it to defray the legal costs of the ex-husband. Even Jay Barnes thinks that.
And what difference does that make? Isn't the truth the truth? You know, it's kind of like this Hillary Clinton deal going on, that we're all cut up in the fact that her emails got hacked, and no one ever wants to point out that her
emails were not hacked, which is kind of interesting.
Well, that's true too. But no one points out the fact that the truth is the truth. When did the media stop believing in the truth? That's what I want to know.
Well, I agree with you, and if you also listen to those podcasts, I've never criticized Lauren Traeger for doing what she did. I understand.
No, because she's part of your club, and Scott's not.
No.
I really believe. I'm not being too hard on you. I think that's what it is. Scott Fahn is an entrepreneur, and let me say this. Whether you agree with what he does or don't agree with what he does, Scott Fahn, through either entrepreneurship or in whatever way, tracks and knows more of what's going on in Jefferson City and what happens and reports on it through the television and through the Missouri Times in a way that, frankly, Joe, used to be filled by the Post-Dispatch and Kansas City Star, and it's not now.
And that's a fair criticism, but I would really push back against your argument that nobody knew who this woman was. From talking with people in the know, the fact that this information was released basically ruined this woman's life.
Well, and I agree with that, but who released it?
Yeah, it was mainly the Greitens lawyers.
Yeah, who released it?
Who released it?
Yeah.
I mean, you're right. The primarily people that were pushing her identity were the pro-Greitens forces.
And I want to say that was one of the tremendous mistakes of how they conducted crisis management.
But you know what? There are Twitter accounts that I could show you after this of people that were anti-Greitens that were revealing the person's name in 2017.
Actually, they were revealed now that I know, and I didn't know before. They were revealed on those Twitter accounts prior to the election.
And
really,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So back to what you're talking about. How should they have handled this? I mean, just forgetting the basics, but just like crisis management. I mean, trying to. Should he have apologized?
He clearly should have apologized.
I mean, I covered a couple of his events he had in Jeff City, including one during the last days of the General Assembly, and he was not apologizing at all.
He clearly should have apologized. He clearly should have been honest. I want you to remember, they hired a lobbyist to go around and talk to the state legislators for him. Now, it's a very simple decision in my mind, and I'm a simple person. If he couldn't tell the truth to the legislators, he should have resigned. And if he could go around and tell the truth to the legislators, then he should have done it himself.
So, I mean, are there lessons for the future? I mean, out of this?
Well, I think there's a lot. I want to say it again because it seems like I want to say again, I think Eric Greitens has a lot of potential. I think Eric Greitens could still become a great public servant. I think Eric Greitens has lessons to learn, which are things about knowing what you don't know and about it's in the Greek tragedies, the tragic flaw, it generally tends to be pride among some great heroes. I think the public has something to understand about elections, and how elections are conducted. I think that the dark money, and I have been saying this since 1982,
yes,
and we have constitutional provisions to work that we have to deal with. I think dark money is an absolute threat to our constitutional democracy. All those are lessons to be learned, but will they be learned? I don't know. I tend to worry that we're headed a little the wrong direction.
Now, did your experience, has that affected how you look upon either endorsing or working for anybody who's running for office in the future? Because I mean, you are a veteran Republican, somebody who's well respected, and that people. I mean, that amazes me that you were persona non grata at one point.
Yeah, and that
didn't take long.
And that was going to be my question. Like, what lessons did you learn from this? Because, again, you and Sarah Steelman exerted a lot of your political capital for this person. And you're probably thinking, well, I'm not going to do that again.
No, it's look, this is not my first rodeo, and this is part of the threat you have. A true story. 2 days before the election, I knew he was going to win, and most of the Greitens campaign knew he was going to win. I also watched, if you recall, the Catherine Hanaway campaign had basically become the general election campaign. And I already saw that.
Now
effort.
we're talking about the primary.
Well, no, I'm talking about the general.
Okay, go ahead.
And I said to one of his close friends, I've seen this happen before. The palace guard starts closing ranks. They try to keep other people from talking to the governor. They try to keep the governor from hearing views outside of the staff views or understand when things are going wrong. And I think it's going to be up to you and the close personal friends to keep that from happening. And actually, it not only happened, it happened faster than I could have imagined. But is that something new? The Palace Guard is a fable. And how the Palace Guard works, it's taken down a lot of governors. It took down Kit Bond in his first term, but Kit Bond learned and became a great public servant. It was part of the problem and why Matt Blunt only served one term. So did I learn anything new? I learned that my judgment's not infallible, but I had figured that out a long time ago.
Last question before we let you go. What advice would you have for Governor Parson to avoid some of the mistakes of Greitens? Because we can relitigate the past 5 or 6 months forever, but it's undisputable. He made massive mistakes before January 2018. He made massive mistakes before he ran for office, and he made massive mistakes during that 5 months of crisis. What would you tell the current governor about how to avoid some of those things? Some of them are obvious, but some of them may not be.
Well, he doesn't need me to tell him anything because I know Mike Parson very well. In fact, another interesting story, I did not endorse Greitens until Mike Parson dropped out of the governor's race because I think Mike Parson is really a fine human being. They're not going to happen to Mike Parson because, 1, he's humble, 2, his priorities are the state of Missouri, and 3, Mike Parson and his staff have such a different attitude than the prior governor. They have an attitude that they want to learn. They want to hear from people with different viewpoints. They want to let their actions be shaped by what the state and its citizens need, not by what, some ideology. And let me say one thing we're talking about dark money, and again, I don't think Mike Parson's getting enough credit for this. His PAC is operating totally transparent.
Yes.
Mike Parson is doing more to change the swamp, as they like to say it, even though you'd call him an experienced politician. He's doing more by foregoing the dark money, making his PAC transparent than any other politician in Missouri has, despite all this talk about it.
I can't emphasize enough how important that is, because after Amendment 2, we're going to see pretty much every statewide official attached with PACs. And the fact that the governor is setting the tone by revealing all the donors, I think is going to speak volumes.
And the fact that, okay, I'm not taking sides in anything, but I covered a Republican rally in South County on Saturday. The governor was there, and it was refreshing from the standpoint that, okay, there were some logistic issues as far as he didn't have a lectern. He let me lean in and hold the mic underneath him and, just do things that, frankly, under Eric Greitens, and with all due respect, it didn't happen. And in fact, Parsons said, well, what else do you need to ask me? I told his staff certain questions. He came over the side, got it done in like 5 minutes of his time. He was able to go about. I was able to continue to do my job. And I think many people don't realize, for most reporters, we just want to do our job. And our job is to give you information. You decide what you want to do with it. But it's helpful when you have somebody in public office of either party, any party, who recognizes that really, I just want him to talk into the mic. That's all.
Mike Parson is a legitimately wonderful human being with a tremendous amount of experience. He's smart. I think he's going to be a great governor. I was wrong about Governor Greitens, but I think I'm going to be right about Governor Parson. But you pay your money, you take your chances. I think I've got one coming.
Yeah, we'll have you back in a couple years to see if you're right or wrong on this one. We want to thank you so much for coming in today. I have a tremendous respect for your wife, Sarah Steelman, who I've had a professional relationship with for 11 or 12 years. But you're not so bad yourself.
Well, I kind of work in her shadow, but it's okay.
For
I appreciate being here. And I'm going to say this to you. You all do a fantastic job. I complain about the media,
and
but
that's
your
okay.
podcast and the work you all do for this radio station is really, I think, still what I think of as an old-type journalism, which I think is a lot different than the clickbait we see today.
Well, thank you. And for all of our stories, stlpublicradio.org. Follow me on Twitter at jrosenbaum. Follow Joe on Twitter at
J Mannies. That's JMANNIES.
And is it D Steelman Law? Is that where your Twitter account is?
D Steelman Law, I think, is my Twitter account. I don't know these things.
Yeah, it's a very entertaining Twitter account, and I highly recommend people who are into Missouri politics or higher education to follow it. Until next time, so long.